It's my honor to introduce Dr. Susannah Crockford. Dr. Crockford is an anthropologist at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, specializing in environmental and medical anthropology and the anthropology of religion. Her first book is entitled Ripples of the Universe, Spirituality in Sedona, Arizona, and it was published in May of 2021 by the University of Chicago Press. In my opinion, alongside Courtney Bender's 2010 book, The New Metaphysicals, Dr. Crockford's book has become the go-to ethnography of spiritual people in the United States. It's a must-read for graduate students in particular, and I assign it to many of my students here at UC Santa Barbara. This July, Dr. Crockford will publish her second book, which is titled "A Perturbed System: Religion and Climate Change at the End of a World," again with the University of Chicago Press. That book's a multi-sided ethnography of climate change, examining the role of religion in climate discourse. In addition to these books, Dr. Crockford is the author of numerous articles and essays, including an article on astrology that I assigned in my religion and popular culture course this quarter. I see some of my students are attending right now, so you've already read some of Dr. Crockford's work. She's expert in many facets of contemporary spiritual culture, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say today. Before I turn it over to Dr. Crockford, I should add that this lecture is the second in a 9-lecture series that's taking place over the next 3 years. These lectures are part of a larger project that I'm co-leading on metaphysical spirituality, which is funded by a generous grant from the John Templeton Foundation. I am a professor in the religious studies department and an expert in non-religion, which includes spirituality. I'm co-leading that project with my friend and colleague Matt Harris, who's a professor at the University of Chicago. And Dr. Harris is also organizing a series of events there. And now I'm especially grateful to the CAP Center here at UCSB and its director, Greg Johnson. They've co-sponsored this lecture. And I'm also thankful for all the help we received in putting this together from Dr. Dusty Hosley, who's the center's associate director, and from Patrick Tugdwell, who's a PhD student in religious studies here at UCSB, who's helping with all kinds of aspects of this project. So it's my pleasure now to give the floor to Dr. Crockford. The title of her lecture today, as you can see at the top of your screen, is Global Spirituality in Digital Media and Popular Culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you to the CAP Center. I really appreciate this invitation, and I appreciate that you all came here, at least virtually, and took the time to listen to me talk about spirituality today. I can talk about spirituality a lot. I can't actually see the slides. I just want to point that out, which is making it a bit odd for me to. Okay, we've done it. We've got the slides. Awesome. So I've been thinking about spirituality for a long time. Since I started my first research project in 2011, which thinking about that sort of makes me feel old. And as Joe mentioned, my first project turned into a book, Ripples of the Universe. That was based on fieldwork in Sedona. I've also done fieldwork in Scottsdale last year in 2025, also on spirituality and yoga, which is where this lovely image of the inside of a yoga studio came from. And then this year I started a project in Glastonbury in Southwest England, where spirituality is also very present. I'm going to talk about why that is a bit later. But this long-term trajectory of studying spirituality has really got me thinking, especially recently, about global spirituality, especially going to different locations in different countries and on different continents and finding enough similarities that you can trace a tradition, I think. So I'm going to talk today about, first of all, what is global spirituality? And if you can turn to the next slide. So, Andrea Jane in Peace, Love, Yoga, The Politics of Global Spirituality, she makes the argument that there is a global spirituality, that it is distinct from traditional religious institutions, things like Christian churches, for example, and it is also enmeshed in neoliberal governance. Now, it's Jane's critique that global spirituality is politically conservative, it's constituted by an individualist consumerism and also an Orientalist appropriation. She calls it a modern manifestation of religion. Now, Jane's is a critical analysis, and it focuses in particular on yoga in the US and India. And it really takes spirituality in its global form to be a form of consumption. Think something that people engage with in a way that seems extractive, at least in the way she portrays it. But at the same time, she also talks about how it is global, that it is connected through the shared culture with identifiable texts, such as these books here on the shelf. You've got works, for example, by Yogananda, Be Here Now, which is by Ram Dass. These are the same sorts of books that you'll find on yoga studios all around the world, and not just in yoga studios, in all other kinds of spiritual businesses or just practitioners' homes. You can also find a shared culture in the building. So I've already mentioned this is a yoga studio. It sort of has a similarity, at least, with enough studios around the world to be able to identify these wherever you go. Shared symbols, you've got the namaste uh, greeting that has been appropriated into yoga culture. And also there's a shared aesthetics, and especially in the last image, which, and you can sort of see it as well in this one, these are from the same studio in Scottsdale, that there's this aesthetics of global spirituality that is shiny and fragrant and full of crystals. And I always know when I come into a place where people are into spirituality, because it definitely has a certain smell as well as a certain aesthetic. It's sort of a bit like sage. So you could take this Scottsdale yoga studio and you could put it in New York or Toronto or London or Amsterdam or Melbourne, and it would remain legible. And it would attract a similar upper middle class or affluent clientele who would understand what they could access by going there. And this is sort of Jane's critique that there's something sort of insidious about the form of spirituality that people are partaking in when they go to these spaces. However, Jane does not offer a systematic definition of what global spirituality is. And there's a good reason for this if we turn to the next slide. Defining spirituality is really hard. There's several uses of the term. You can talk about the spirituality of a certain tradition, like Christian spirituality, Islamic spirituality. You can talk about spiritual but not religious, which is how people are increasingly defining themselves who kind of fall into that category that Joe mentioned, the nuns, non-religion. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. And they make that distinction. And then there is what was once called New Age spirituality, but which I and many others have increasingly started to call metaphysical spirituality. And it's this latter form of spirituality that I've been studying since 2012. First in Sedona, I've also done fieldwork at Flagstaff and Scottsdale, both in Arizona, and now Glastonbury in England. So the definition that I have developed comes from this ethnographic basis. It comes from the way people talk, the way people describe spirituality. And so it's a real bottom-up definition. Um, and it's sort of been my working formulation of metaphysical spirituality for some time now. So I've got it down into four key principles, but you can also find this in an expanded version in the introduction to my first book. So the first principle for defining metaphysical spirituality is that the central organizing concept is energy. And energy is seen as an all-pervasive force and is characterized by frequency and vibration. So everything is energy in the universe, which means including us and the whole physical world that we live in. And all of that energy vibrates at a certain frequency. And in the dimension we're in now, the third one, this gives the appearance of mass. Some of these ideas are sort of scientific at the same time, but they're used in spirituality in religious ways. So I've already mentioned the universe. So the universe has a special place in metaphysical spirituality, and I call it a pantheistic conception of divinity. So it's sort of all-encompassing. Everything is the universe. We are all part of the universe. We're all part of this energy of the universe that is vibrating constantly, and the universe can also kind of it has this agentic force in the metaphysical spirituality. So it's like people will say things like the universe wants you to have this, or the universe wanted me to do this, right? So it has this sense of being both divine but also everything, which is why it's pantheistic. Within the universe, we have a purpose as human beings, and which is to go on these progressive stages of enlightenment that are described as a spiritual path. So what a spiritual path could be in practice, theoretically can be anything. It's up to you to discern what your spiritual path is. But what the spiritual path is meant to do is meant to raise the frequency of your vibration. The higher up you go, the closer you become to the highest frequency in the universe, which is often described as source or spirit. And so when you reach that high stage, then that's sort of like enlightenment. But that's also known more commonly as ascension or the shift. So when you ascend up through these dimensions, people often talk about kind of ascending to the fifth dimension or just 5D. That means you've kind of gone to a higher, more elevated stage on your spiritual path. And so this creates a millenarian belief, this new paradigm replacing the old paradigm. That's when everyone ascends to this higher spiritual level together. We don't necessarily do it by joining groups, so we all do it by following our individual spiritual paths, and then those together all bring the vibration of the planet up, and then that's when we will reach this new paradigm, which very much closely aligns with what was once called the New Age, right? Which is this sort of new age of peace and harmony when people are more spiritual, there's no war, suffering, and everything's better, which is why it's millenarian, right? Because millenarianism means sort of the end of this current corrupted world and the start of a new, better one. So this is a definition I've been working on for some time. I'm not going to say it's perfect or all-encompassing, but what I think is it does is it provides a way of thinking about something which scholars in particular A, find hard to define, and B, tend to sort of fall back on saying things like, well, spirituality is sort of non-formative, it's amorphous, or sort of giving a list of practices. Like it involves things like astrology and crystal healing and yoga. And like, yes, all of those things can be spiritual paths. But I always argue that a list of practices is not a definition, and you can be into astrology without being into anything else. So metaphysical spirituality, I think, needs a definition in order to talk about it with more specificity. It already has had its religious genealogy traced by Catherine Albanese. And what's emerging now from metaphysical spirituality, so 20 years on from when Albanese wrote her work, and 10 or so years on from when I first started my research anyway, is that metaphysical spirituality is emerging into what I'm calling global spirituality. And it is this global spirituality that has kind of emerged from the fact that metaphysical spirituality has been spread and sold and transported all around the globe. It's like a religious strand of globalization, sort of the same currents that internationalized trade and communication also took various forms of religion around the world as well. Neoliberal capitalism, as Jane would argue, is part of that context. But my interest, rather than criticizing or dismissing global spirituality as this sort of commodified form of religion, is to look at it as its own thing. If people say that they're spiritual but not religious, well, we should take that seriously, sort of the first point. And the second point is I think it's more productive to analyze how it has been spread and what are the consequences. So if you will turn to the next slide. We'll talk about how is global spirituality or how has global spirituality been spread through digital media and pop culture. So there's four main ways that it has been spread that I am going to talk about in this talk. This is not an exhaustive list, of course. So we're going to talk about signs found in pop culture. So that's signs that people read into things that they see in pop culture, often that wasn't necessarily intended in that way. Pop culture also spreads spirituality in a more intentional way. And then there are spiritual practitioners who are working as online influencers who spread a lot of this content. And then the content is designed specifically for a spiritual audience. And so through these four ways, four paths, we're going to look at just how this sort of global transmission has happened and is continuing to happen. So I'm going to start with the first one. If we turn to the next slide, how spiritual paths can become defined and reinforced through signs found in pop culture references. Often, as I said, references that were likely not made with the intention of being interpreted spiritually. They were often made just for entertainment purposes, but because of their popularity or just because of the idiosyncratic meaning that people find in them, they can enforce or sort of reinforce and define people's spiritual paths. I'm going to give you an example from my work in. This is Peter Gersten. You can see in the top left image, that's him sitting on top of Bell Rock, which is one of the vortexes in Sedona. Next to that image, that is the picture of the rock itself. It's about 480 feet above sea level. So Peter believed that we were living in a simulated reality. So you may have heard these kind of ideas of living in a simulation. It was popularized by Nick Bostrom, and I think Elon Musk also thinks that it's probably likely that we're living in a simulation. It's sort of a philosophical thought experiment that can't be disproved. But for Peter, it had constituted this belief system that brought a lot of meaning in his life, mostly through this idea that he was going to reveal that we were living in a simulation by walking through a portal on the 21st of December 2012. He initially believed that he would need to open this portal himself by physically demonstrating his faith by jumping from Bell Rock, which, as you can see from the image, is quite high. If he had done it, he would have died. I'm going to not leave you in suspense. He did not do that. He's still alive. But this was what he called his leap of faith. And that was the sort of one of the main ideas in his spiritual path, that he had this mission in the simulation. It was to reveal it. And the way he did that was by making a leap of faith. And he gained this conviction um, through that his spiritual path, what kind of took this form through these signs that he read. So he read reality as permeated with clues, and many of these clues he found in popular culture. So for him, there were no coincidences, only synchronicities, which is a common term in spirituality, basically for coincidences, but it comes from the work of Carl Jung. But synchronicities pointed to deeper meanings in the simulation. So when you saw something, such as the number 1111 is a very common one for Peter, 2012 was another one, and he thought that the Mayan long count calendar was another. When he came across references to these, those were signs telling him something about what he needed to do. So pop culture was how the simulation communicated with him in a way. So way back in 2012, probably many of you don't remember this, but the world was supposed to end on the 21st of December 2012. This is because of various interpretations of the Mayan long count calendar, most of which were not supported by mainstream archaeologists. But Peter himself also dismissed a lot of these Mayan apocalypse theories. He said that the Mayan calendar did not predict the end of the world as it had become known for. But what it was a clue. And it was this clue that was pointing towards him being on the top of Bell Rock on the 21st of December, at the time 11:11, because the winter solstice was at 11:11 Universal Coordinated Time on that date. So he called 11:11, these kind of repeated ones, a gateway, the symbol that when he saw it, he interpreted it as a code in the simulation that helped him realize what was going on, and therefore remember why he was in this simulation and what he was there to do. And he likened it to the number three, which he got from an episode of Star Trek, the episode Cause and Effect, which I managed to find a screenshot from there. So it's Star Trek: The Next Generation. And in this episode, the crew is sort of trapped in a time loop, and they only get out of this time loop when Data the android notices a recurrence of threes everywhere in his experience. And then he realizes the significance of this. So for Peter, that's what 11:11 was doing. So anyway, he saw it, whether it was on a cash register when he was like paying for his gas or whatever, he would be like, okay, this means it's something significant. So that's how he knew that the date he had to do this was the winter solstice. So for him, science fiction movies and TV shows like Star Trek contain these messages that helped him understand this simulated reality that we exist in. And he was obsessed with particular TV shows that he felt contained the most relevant messages about the simulation. The biggest one for him was the TV show Lost. Lost, again, is maybe a slightly outdated reference for many of you watching. It ran from 2004 to 2010, and it's about an adventure series that focuses on survivors of a plane crash, and they find themselves on a mysterious island and hijinks ensue. So Peter took direct inspiration from Lost, and the idea of his leap of faith was inspired by an episode of Lost called 316. So this was his favorite episode, and 316 was also his birthday, March 16th. So that confirmed it to him that the episode was very relevant to him. And he suggested before the 21st happened that the end would be like the ending of the show Lost, which was apparently, according to many fans, a little disappointing. But that some things would be explained, others would not, and it would be up to whoever was left to figure out what was going on. He sort of thought he was going to disappear on the 21st of December 2012, and he called the show a metaphor for what was going on in his life in Sedona at the end of that year. So in terms of movies, he was also very inspired by the Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie, the Matrix trilogy, and the Martian Chronicles. So very quickly, Close Encounters is about alien contact at Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and Peter would relate his own obsession with Bell Rock and Sedona to that of the main characters with Devil's Tower in the movie. I haven't got the image of it here, but Peter's apartment was literally covered with representations of Bell Rock and like paintings and like embossed forms and pictures. It was everywhere in his apartment. He said he too felt drawn to a specific place by strange signs that he interpreted as paranormal. So The Matrix is very influential, not just for Peter, but I'm going to mention it later as well. It's a three-part story about how humans are living in a virtual reality simulation while machines use their biochemical energy to power themselves, which Peter's beliefs about living in the simulation mirrored. However, Peter did not have any specific ideas about where our physical bodies were really, which was more of the focus of this trilogy of movies. The Martian Chronicles is a mini-series based on the Ray Bradbury collection of short stories of the same name, and it deals with human exploration of Mars and contact with the native Martians. Peter said that the scene where the main character has to jump off a cliff because he sees some blue orbs that no one else can see, and only then do the native Martians become visible to him. This scene influenced greatly his own leap of faith belief. He told me that you cannot expect the aliens to come to you. You have to show that you believe first. In the simulation, what you believe creates what is real. So this meant that the TV shows and movies he liked to watch repeatedly were signs that gave him instructions for what to do in the simulation. Now, he didn't actually end up jumping on the 21st of December 2012. If you do want to know what happened on that date, it's all in chapter 2 of my first book. Basically, the short version is nothing really happened, and he came down after spending 14 hours on the top of that rock. And then when he came down, he used a different TV show called Once Upon a Time to help him understand what happened next. So he just sort of went on doing the same thing with different sources for his inspiration. So if we move to the next slide, I'll talk about how pop culture spreads spirituality in a more intentional way. And one of my favorite examples to use of this is through memes that are shared on social media that explain and illustrate spiritual principles, often using humor or in-group references. So things that once you start to get into spirituality, you'll recognize and get more out of. This type of content is intentionally created to advance and repeat spiritual principles, ideas, symbols, and messages. People share them and they reproduce online, kind of showing how prevalent some of these ideas are then becoming. And I've got a few examples that I've collected over the years for you here. So, um, you probably, if you've ever studied spirituality, already come across the how is it different from religion, right? Is it different from religion? So for people involved in spirituality, there's a very clear difference between spirituality and religion. And this first meme, that's what it's about. So religion is belief in someone else's experience. Spirituality is having your own experience. So this is the contrast they often draw between religion and spirituality. Religion means following dogma, tradition, authority, whereas spirituality is creating your own path, right? Rejecting religion as all these things that you don't like. And it means that your own experience is all you need. You don't need a book or some guy somewhere telling you how to connect with the divine, with the universe. You can have your own experience through the practices that you do. However, this can lead to everyone having their own truth because there's this idea of discernment that the truth about the right way to go for you comes from your own discernment, not from any external source. And there's a danger of solipsism in there. Because then it can mean that everyone has their own truth derived from their own experience. And this second guy, he's my favorite. This is the universe. And it's a guy with fingers, and the fingertips are you. So this is trying to explain the principle of the oneness of the universe, which as a cosmological idea can be kind of confusing. But I basically, because we're all part of the universe, this we are basically in our mortal existence, just the universe experiencing itself just basically because it wanted to. And in this meme, it kind of describes that as the universe pretending to be individuals. So you think you're you, but actually you're part of the universe. So the experience of separation is just an illusion. And really, the universe is just experiencing itself. And I've heard this experience, this explanation of the universe and oneness in all of the places where I've done field work. Um, this idea that, nothing, everything is going to happen exactly the way it's supposed to happen because you're just the universe sort of playing at different experiences. In some ways, it's sort of used to kind of take yourself a bit less seriously. But I think in other ways it can be used in quite a profound cosmological sense to kind of talk about a monistic conception of the universe and in the cosmology of spirituality. Okay, if we move to the next slide. I only have a couple more memes, I promise. All right, so words cast spells. That's why it's called spelling. Words are energy. Use them wisely. Um, I mean, I love this partly because of the wordplay on spells and spelling. But one of the principles of spirituality, as I've already kind of mentioned before with Peter, is that you create your reality through the energy that you put out. So if you have a very positive attitude, you say positive things, you use positive words, you try and keep your thoughts positively. Well, in spirituality, that idea is that you are creating your reality to be how you want it to be this positive, uplifting, spiritually elevating experience. And in Sedona, I would actually hear people, they consciously change their language to be more positive in order to not kind of put negative words out there into the universe, kind of bringing their vibes down. So they would say things like, if you love, rather than if you like. Um, the next one, crystals and the matrix. So when negative vibes come at you, but you have crystals in your pocket, obviously there's a lot of people out there who will put negative vibes into the universe, but if you have crystals in your pocket, you can stop them, like Neo stops bullets in the movie The Matrix. So one thing this is referring to is the idea that crystals offer a form of energetic protection. They're also used for healing in spirituality, but a lot of the kind of other main use for them is sort of as like warding off other people's bad vibes and negative thoughts, especially negative thoughts about you, like through jealousy or anger at something you've done. It also shows just how important the movie The Matrix is in spirituality. It just comes up all the time, and it comes up all the time that it's sort of been divorced from the source material. So people who are not spiritually aware or awake are referred to as being still stuck in the matrix. Awakening experiences, that's when you sort of become spiritual in a way. It's sort of like a conversion experience. That's described as waking up from the matrix. They do sometimes use the phrase red pill with all of its associations. And I think that there's this part of spirituality where people like to see themselves as being this sort of like badass freedom fighter in a plane of existence that most people are not aware of. Like we think they're just like holding crystals and meditating, but actually they're changing reality for the better for themselves and by extension everyone else. So we're going to move on now. And we'll talk a little bit about spiritual practitioners who work online as online influencers because they are very important in spirituality. So, in order to earn or a way of earning a living from spiritual practice, you really need to be online. It will give you a vastly larger audience than is possible in offline communities, even in places like Sedona, where you have a concentration of spiritual businesses and tourists coming in to use these practices. It's still very hard to make a living there. So being online, basically, there's a sort of economic side to it, but it also enables people to kind of spread their influence and their net much wider. And they do this through creating content and offering services. The most successful will have these platforms that sort of operate like multi-level marketing subscription platforms where you like pay every month to kind of join basically Facebook groups and to like maybe talk to the influencer once a month. Andrew Tate also uses that same sort of subscription platform model. So that's sort of for the top level. Most people are not that successful because you really need people to be so bought into your content that they're willing to spend like $10, $20 every month just on either talking to you or talking to other people who are also followers of you, which is what it often is on closer inspection. So I'm going to talk about a couple in a bit more detail now. The first one is Krista Reiser, who is this lady at the top here. She is an Oracle starseed. So I met her in 2012 in Sedona. She is Finnish American. She grew up in New Jersey, and she had this vivid awakening experience in a Whole Foods parking lot where she just started channeling. But it didn't come from nowhere. Her mother was already into sort of various spiritual texts, and she had read things like the Seth materials. So she was sort of aware of the culture, and then she had this experience where she just started channeling. And she has, for the last, I guess, 15 years or more now, channeled a group of aliens called the Orion Council. She is also defined as a starseed. A starseed is a human in an alien body. Krista says that she is from the planet Lyra. And she offers a range of products and videos and readings on her website. So if you click on the top link, that one, hopefully this will work. And we'll see. Yay. Okay, so this is Krista's website. So if you scroll down a bit, you should be able to see her. She also has clothes for sale. I think she makes a lot of them herself. It might be reselling though. She's written several books. A lot of the books are channeled material, so she speaks, and channeling is basically spirit communication. So the oracle or the channeler will sort of set their consciousness aside, and they will talk as, in this case, the Orion Council. I've seen her do it at the Sedona Public Library. She sort of puts on a funny voice, but otherwise she looks the same. She just kind of sits there and talks. So the Orion Council material, which you can see there, so you can read all of the channeled messages that she has. She has various videos that she shares. If you click on, can you click on shop? And then that will show at the top there. Yeah, and that will show you what she sells. So she has an Etsy shop. So she doesn't host her own shop. She uses the popular market platform Etsy, and she sells art. She has, I believe that is an Orion deck. That's like a channeling, no, oracle cards, and she sells various art that she creates. She doesn't have that many products anymore. She used to have more. Okay, if you can go back to the PowerPoint now. So she has a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is relatively popular. She says she has 2 million lifetime views, which actually, I mean, in terms of YouTube, is not immense, but still, she's doing all right. She used to be on Instagram. She had about 14,000 followers on Instagram as well. But she is sort of a local Sedona version of a spiritual influencer. She was never in the big leagues. She would go to kind of conferences in Sedona, and she would have a vending table. She would sell her art. She would sell her books. But her network was never that large. She no longer has an Instagram. So it seems like she's sort of receded a lot of her activity. Now, the next influencer I'm going to talk about is sort of one of the much more well-known, much more popular influencers in this uh, area. This is Elizabeth April, who is in the image down there. And if you want to click, we can get through to her website. So she also calls herself a starseed. So she's also a human in, or no, an alien in a human's body. She's also a remote viewer. So in a remote viewing is kind of what's now known, that used to be called scrying, which is kind of appears in a range of different esoteric traditions. It's also in early Mormonism, but it's sort of seeing things at a distance, right? Clairvoyance, yeah. So where you can see things that are not happening in your immediate vicinity, but you sort of see them spiritually with your third eye. So your third eye has to be open, and this is how Elizabeth April markets herself. She has a lot of content about aliens. Like Krista, she also channels a group of aliens called the Galactic Federation. She's not the only person who channels the Galactic Federation. No one really owns these groups of aliens in any like intellectual property wise. So a lot of people would, I have seen many other channelers in Sedona who have channeled the Galactic Federation. They're basically meant to be a group of like the good aliens who are fighting the bad aliens. The bad aliens are reptilians. Elizabeth April is very into conspiracy theories. And if you sort of scroll down a bit, you might see some of her videos. Her content is pretty interesting. So yeah, okay, you can see it already. Aliens, uh, ex-government researcher claims about crash UFOs, Antarctic ice walls. What could be behind it, right? It's all very speculative. Inner Earth is a really old conspiracy theory slash alternative history that there's sort of other races that live inside the Earth and we don't know about them because we've never been to the center of the Earth. She has quite a lot, and this was interesting to me just because I'm British. She has quite a lot of conspiracy theories about the royal family, especially Kate Middleton having a series of clones. So if you're not up on British royal family gossip, basically Kate Middleton, who's married to Prince William, had was diagnosed with cancer, but there were a lot of rumors before she revealed her cancer diagnosis, and these rumors turned into conspiracy theories. And like Elizabeth April is still running with Kate Middleton conspiracy theories, and she's got this whole idea about Kate Middleton having a series of clones that replace her in public. So this is what her content is like. She offers courses. So yeah, if you click on Explore Our Shop, we should be able to see, or if you go to the top, you can see the shop. So she has courses, which you can pay for. She runs workshops. Most of these are online. She sells various products. She offers readings. So that this is kind of a thing that's very common among spiritual influencers. So you would usually talk to them over like a Zoom meeting, basically, and they will give you a reading whichever modality that they use to do that. Her videos are very popular. She has a number of different books. A lot of her products, I don't know, if you can go to the shop, you can see it. So if you scroll up, there should be a link to this. She has her own Amazon wish list. Is this the shop? You can see that a lot of her products cost $11.11, which I just wanted to point out to show that. Yes, 22, 22, 22, 22. So this repeated numbers, they're called angel numbers. It's not just Peter. Like a lot of people like these repeated numbers in spirituality, and it's really common for spiritual influencers to price all of their products with these repeated numbers, $22.22 or $11.11. And she's got a subscription service. So this is what I was talking about. So you can basically subscribe to her platform and you'll get and it's $8.88. There you go. You can embark on your cosmic journey. She will guide you. And basically, I've never subscribed to this myself, but what these platforms nearly always are is you get access to private groups, which are basically Facebook groups, and you get, various giveaways, and then you get some sort of level of service from the influencer themselves. One of the things April Elizabeth does a lot is this sort of like, how do you know you're a star seed? So being a star seed is often having a special mission. So you've got like understand your mission on Earth, right? Break free from your old programming. So say you're sort of sad, you're feeling kind of unfulfilled, you go on the internet, you think, well, maybe this thing could make sense. She is here to guide you, to lead you through that awakening experience. So then you then understand what your mission is, maybe discover which planet you're originally from, and then work out how to move on from there on your spiritual path. So if we go back to the PowerPoint, oh, she has 489,000 followers on Instagram. And she is also the one, at least in the last year or so, who's been getting a lot of attention from the media. So every so often I get contacts from journalists who are just like, explain the starseed thing to me. What are they talking about? Do they believe they're aliens? And lately it's really been focused on Elizabeth April. She's been getting very popular, and I think it's especially partly it's the claims about aliens because aliens have just been in the news a lot more with the various sort of disclosures and declassifications of documents about UAPs in the military. And she was also very prolific in spreading conspiracy theories. And that's sort of one of if the media starts paying attention to spirituality, that's one of the things that they write about. They tend to be a bit sensationalist. But what's important about what these influencers offer is that they sort of offer this way in to spirituality. Like, yes, they're selling you products, um, but it's also a way of kind of expanding this form of practice. So the structure of global spirituality is like that of a network. Spiritual influencers, they don't have an official role in an institution, like for example, priests or pastors in Christianity. They gain their following through putting out this spiritual content. Like there's no one else that's going to support them monetarily except themselves in this, right? There is no institution that tithes to support them. So of course they're going to get people to pay for their services, right? We all live in capitalism, and they do so through offering services like reading, making videos, and then blog posts and selling products. Their position is also quite precarious, right? It's contingent on their popularity, right? Elizabeth April's been popular this last year or so. Next year, maybe not. So people tend to go up or down. That's Krista, for example, used to be much more popular, and she's really put out less content. I think she's also just doing other things now. Um, and the audience that they have is dispersed globally through their online networks, which means it's also dependent on the social media platforms that maintain their accounts. They may not be dependent on a physical space or a specific building in a specific town, which can be expensive, right? And it kind of contains them to a very specific location. But their following is still dependent on a certain platform, and it's that platform that these social media platforms provide for them. So, in thinking of it as a network that's kind of connected through these nodes of influences, global spirituality has a different structure from traditional institutional religion in the US, which was, especially in terms of Protestantism, very much bound to physical congregations. So, if we will move to the next slide. So, what do influencers you spread? They spread this content, and this is content that is specifically designed for spiritual audiences, unlike things like Lost and Star Trek, where they're just sort of reading into other things themselves. There is a general and pervasive mistrust of what they call the mainstream media, and they often claim, for example, to be shadow banned by social media platforms. This was especially the case during the COVID pandemic when a number of them were banned from Facebook and Instagram, as it was then Twitter, because they were posting a lot of COVID conspiracy theories. But there's sort of like there's the people who did get banned, and then there's like the existence of shadow banning as a sort of, why no one follows me explanation. Um, their own networks have been developed to take that place of those larger social media platforms, which are sort of associated with the mainstream media, which is, full of the lies and corruptions of the third dimension. Rumble is an alternative to YouTube. These are not used exclusively by spiritual people. Spiritual people are there as well, but there's a lot of stuff on Rumble. I'm not saying you should go look at it, but it is sort of the alternative to YouTube. It's much more lightly moderated, even as poorly moderated as YouTube is. X now probably counts as one of these sites because this is very poorly moderated. You also got things like Parler or Gab or Telegram rather than Facebook or Instagram. You may notice that these sites put spiritual people in the same sites as far-right conspiracy theorists and other extremists. However, one of the things that has changed over the last few years is that there is now a subscription streaming platform, especially for spiritual content. So they don't have to be on all those other unsavory platforms. And it's called Gaia.com. It's sort of a Netflix for spirituality. If you could just very quickly click on that link, you'll see. So you can expand your mind, transform your life. It costs about $13.99 a month, which is more expensive than Netflix, at least where I live. If you just scroll down a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And that'll show you the kinds of videos that they have. So they have documentaries. You can watch videos about astrology, water memory, sacred geometry, crystals, yoga, meditation. They have films as well as documentaries. And they have some very well-known spiritual influencers, people like Dr. Joe Dispenza. There he is, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's sort of into biohacking and like the science of wellness. Marianne Williamson, who you may remember from the Democratic primary of 2020, and Greg Braden, who's one of these ancient alien guys. Oh, there's Marianne Williamson. If you go back to the PowerPoint. Um, so now, instead of influencers having to maintain their own accounts, which are at the mercy of these large social media platforms and tech companies that own them, they have developed their own online spaces. And here, there are still no coincidences, as you can see from this. This is from the website, this screenshot I took. So you are here for a reason. You've always known there's more, a deeper story, a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. Gaia is here to guide you into the depths of who you are, to the truths that lie beyond the surface, and the ancient wisdom calling your soul to remember your intuition is right. Now, if you are in spirituality, that will probably speak to you in a much more personal and specific way than, say, Netflix. Um, so it's a place where spiritual claims can be normative rather than being labeled as fringe or worse, as dangerous misinformation. It's really their own space online. If we go to the next slide. So these examples suggest that global spirituality is not alternative or countercultural or esoteric anymore. It's mainstream. It's connecting geographically and culturally different places through common symbols, themes, ideas, and spokespeople and references. So there is a homogenizing influence of global spirituality, but there are also local variations, and these variations can be seen clearly in what's called power spots. And this is a map of global power spots. I love this map. So the Earth is crisscrossed with lines of energy called ley lines, and they at certain points they intersect, and that's called vortexes, or sometimes they're called gates. And so here they show you some of the gates, like Hawaii is a gate, Bali is a gate. So those are sort of intersections of these powerful lines of energy. The two big lines are the two very powerful ley lines. They're called dragon lines, and then there are seven chakras of the planet. So there's a correspondence between the planet and the body. So in spirituality, it's this old theosophical idea, which comes from an even older Indian idea that there's a system of chakras, which are these seven points in your body that can be blocked. So the earth has them too. And those points have become the locations where there's been a kind of grouping of spiritual people. So one is in California, in fact, Mount Shasta, Glastonbury, where I'm doing research now, that's the heart chakra. And in Glastonbury, people actually call it the heart chakra of the earth. They have taken on that label. Um, so whether this idea of power spots came first and then people moved there, or people moved there and then this idea of power spots came around and kind of explained why they were coming to these places, they are all quite beautiful, appealing landscapes where you get lots of tourism. But there are places where spiritual people gather. So you can see how there's sort of this global spirituality is getting its own sacred geography. And I am very briefly in the last 10 minutes going to explain the two that I've done fieldwork in. So if we move to the next slide, this is some pretty pictures of Sedona, Arizona. So Sedona isn't one of the chakras of the earth. Sedona is a site with vortexes. And this map on the left here shows you the four vortex sites. So one, Bell Rock, that's where Peter was going to jump. There's Airport, Mesa, Cathedral Rock, and Boynton Canyon. So these are all basically rocks, right? Sedona, as you can see from the middle picture, it's in this kind of Red Rock Canyon part of Arizona. You get the edge of the Colorado Plateau. The land starts to kind of do this long descent towards the Sonoran Desert, and Sedona's right on the rim. It's called the Mogollon Rim. So it has these amazing red rock canyons, and there's a river called Oak Creek that goes through. So you actually get trees, which is quite nice for Arizona. So compared to its surrounding landscape, it's sort of very like physically stunning and beautiful. And it is one of these places that is said to have these vortexes. The four on the map, local people basically told me that's just for tourists, that they wanted a place to tell people to go when they came to visit Sedona. They could, visit the 4 points on the map and it would be like their itinerary. But especially the people who had been there for many decades, they said they felt the whole area was a vortex. So it's not just four rocks, it's the whole area, the whole sort of canyon complex that the town is built in. And it even reaches up north to the San Francisco Peaks, which are by Flagstaff, and then further the Grand Canyon's about 2 hours drive to the north. So they thought that whole area had this special energy, and they call it a vortex because it's meant to have this like spiraling formation. People would say that you could tell it was a vortex in Sedona because the trees on the rocks kind of grew in this kind of twisted spiral formation. It may also have been just because they were growing out of the rocks, but that's how people interpreted them. So there are a number of different influences in Sedona that, even though it's sort of part of this global spirituality network, it has its own particular influences that make it different. It has a very strong influence of the presence of indigenous North Americans. People take a lot of inspiration from indigenous peoples in Arizona. So you have the Navajo Reservation and the Hopi Reservation. The whole area used to be Yavapai land. It is very much they take inspiration from rather than indigenous people participating in spirituality. In fact, all of the Navajo people that I spoke to were quite critical of Sedona and they thought it was quite fake. But things like sweat lodges, vision quests, peace pipes, they were all very popular in Sedona amongst spiritual people. Crystals, like in this shop here, you had a number of people calling themselves shaman, for example. It is also quite a high-end tourist resort. It gets about 3 to 4 million visitors per year, but there are only about 10,000 people who are year-round residents. So the tourists dwarf every other aspect of the town, basically. There's a number of different wellness retreats that are held there. There's spas, there's hotels. So for some people, going to Sedona is really like this really nice luxury vacation in a beautiful place where they can also maybe do some crystal healing and get a nice massage. But for some people, it is a place that they feel called to, that they feel has this special energy, and they feel that this energy comes from the earth itself. And they will often say that, the energy of Sedona, it will call you in when you're ready, and then it'll spit you out. And that was really a way of sort of talking about how if people found it very difficult to live there, people involved in spirituality. Anyway, if you've got a lot of money, Sedona's a great place to live. But if you do not, and you're just trying to make a living, say, as a shaman or a psychic or a starseed, and you're sort of doing readings online and you're doing what you can in person, then a lot of people find it very hard to stay. Rent is very high. The tourism kind of boosts the real estate prices, which are quite high anyway, because it's a very nice place to live. And some of the people who own property there are, they count amongst the super rich. Like John McCain, the former Arizona senator, had a whole ranch there. Sharon Stone was said to live there. Orson Welles' daughter, Beatrice Wells, I met her groundskeeper. She lived there. So there was this sort of big gap between sort of the people in Sedona who were trying to live on a day-to-day basis and sort of make money from spirituality, and then the sort of people who were able to come in as tourists and then, even hire the people who actually owned property there and had power in that town. So that is Sedona. If we move to the next slide, I will talk. I think I have 5 minutes left. I'll talk very briefly about Glastonbury, which I've just started doing. So I really want to share these two spaces because I want to show how global spirituality has these commonalities, right? Another crystal store. And look, if you go in a crystal store, I feel like I've been into a lot of crystal stores. If you've been in one, you've been in them all. They all basically sell the same thing. So that's how global spirituality can be homogenizing, but it can also have these local variations. So Glastonbury is in southwest England, quite close to where I live, actually. It has the Tor is the hill, which is the middle picture, and on the top of the Tor is a ruined tower from like the 6th or 7th century. So Glastonbury is also meant to be this sort of intersection point of the ley lines. It's a chakra of the earth. It's the heart chakra. It has a number of different influences as well as spirituality. So it has various sort of kind of revived Celtic traditions, which you can call paganism. There's various Arthurian legends that are associated with the place. For example, King Arthur is meant to be buried inside the Tor or maybe at the Abbey. The Abbey was a Christian center during the medieval period until I don't want to get too much into English history, but basically when the Protestant church in Britain was founded because the king wanted a divorce, he took all the money from the monasteries. In Glastonbury Abbey, they took all the money and they took the abbot up to the top of this hill here, and he was hung, drawn, and quartered, which is a very nasty way to die. But so there's all these legends about that history. So there's a whole Christian history to it as well, and people go there for pilgrimages as they did in the medieval period. Some still do. So you have these sort of Christians, you have pagans, you've got people who follow things like Druidism, goddess spirituality. They celebrate the Wheel of the Year festival. So this image on the left is from Beltane, which was just this past May 1st, which is sort of the spring festival. It's meant to be about fertility. There's a maypole, they kind of dance around it, and there's all these festivities that happen on that day. So it's got a very different set of influences from Sedona, even though there are things in common. The shops on the high street, yes, you can see many things that you'd see in another town with spiritual associations. But unlike Sedona, Glastonbury is still basically a poor rural Somerset town. There is one hotel. It's a Premier Inn, which is sort of like Motel 6 level. Um, there's very few services. It doesn't even have a train station, which like in Britain basically means no one's going to go there. There's a bus, but it's not a very good bus. There's very little infrastructure for tourists. So they do get some tourists. They're always talking about how they're inundated by tourists, but I was always just like, wow, there's really not many, but that's because I was used to being in Sedona. So these are two different spiritual power spots, hotspots, vortexes. They both have beautiful landscape. They both have these mythical associations. They both have a particular history, but the local economic and cultural conditions do vary. So global spirituality may be homogenizing, like many other aspects of capitalism, but it still has a particularity that is specific to place. And spirituality tends to adapt rather than write over these local particularities. And if you can move to the last slide. So global spirituality is, I would argue, a recognizable form of, let's call it religiosity. It has a specific organizational structure, which is that of a network connected through online influencers, but then also physical locations that it is associated with. It is spread through digital media and popular culture, and it has concentrations around the world, such as Glastonbury, which is the top left here. They're praying around the chalice well. Scottsdale, they're also sitting in a circle listening to that little thing in the middle is a speaker playing binaural beats to help induce a meditative state for them. And Sedona, so this is a circle held on a solstice at one of the vortexes. So even though there are these homogenizing forces, they take these local forms, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Crawford. That was a fantastic lecture. I think it's surprisingly hard to circumscribe this tradition, religion, spirituality, its coherence. And I think that your frame that shows us it's not global homogeneity exactly as you're saying, but like these similarities that are undeniable, it's really useful. And it's shocking to me in some ways that it's taken us so long to recognize this coherence. So this is the first time that Patrick and I are using this particular webinar format, but we are pretty sure that you can type questions into the chat and that'll allow us to read them and then Dr. Crockford can respond. So Patrick, is that correct? I know that you're managing the back end.
Yeah, can you click on your end, the Q&A button? You should be able to see, hopefully there's already one question there.
I do not see it.
I think you have to press more and then it says Q&A.
I think you are correct. So Susanna, I don't know if you can see this, but the question is, how are common symbols for spirituality chosen to become global symbols?
Sure that they're chosen. I think that's just something that happens. I would also point out that I'm not a historian, so I'm not one of these people who will patiently go through all of the books and the texts and be like, ah, this is where this comes from. I look at other people's work to find out, for example, where the chakra system came from, right? So we can take that as an example. Like, why was that chosen? I mean, you really have to, if you're going to trace the history, like chakras are incredibly popular in spirituality. Like you can see the symbols on an aesthetic level. You see sort of like the seven colored circles, either on a diagram of a human body or on prayer flags, or people will talk about it. Like practitioners will offer chakra balancing or cleansing services, right? They're everywhere. But what do they mean? And where does it come from? And it's really come from the Theosophical Society and a guy called Charles Ledbetter, who you might read it and say his name is Leadbeater or Leadbeater. I've had arguments with people about how you say this guy's name. I'm going to say it's Ledbetter. Anyway, he wrote a book about chakras where he talks about the chakras. And so there is this idea of chakras in sort of ancient Indian texts, things like the Upanishads, that there are chakras and that they exist and that they're sort of like these spots in the body. But what Leadbeater did was he took it and he said that there's these like seven specific ones. He gave them the names and the colors, and this association then kind of spread out from there. And so now the planet has chakras, not just human bodies. Now, why was that chosen? You mean you can point to a number of different things. India is more often an influence for spirituality than, say, Islam or the Middle East. I mean, you can speculate as to why that is, but it's India, it's Buddhism, and then on the other hand, indigenous people in North America, they are some very common sources. This is where spirituality often gets criticized for being appropriation and, as Andrea Jane would say, Orientalism. I'm not necessarily going to dispute that, but I will say that there's sort of a conventional set of sources. So if just to take the chakras as an example, why is that chosen? Well, I think number one, it has this Indian influence. It goes through the Theosophical Society, which is a very small esoteric group in the late 19th, early 20th century, but they had this outsized impact because of the amount of basically printing, I think, that they did. And they just spread text and they moved a lot of texts from India to the West. So they were a real channel from East to West. And that really spread the sort of associations of like secret ancient wisdom coming from the East. And where it often came was through this specific group of basically occultists. And then it became popular in spirituality now. I don't know how much you can attribute intentionality to that, but I think there are certain reasons why that happened, and it is all towards to do with that specific cultural genealogy.
I see that there's several good questions here. This one, I don't know if you'll be able to get it on the fly. What's your favorite spirituality meme?
Oh my gosh. It's the one with the fingers. I think I already told you. I've already answered this in the talk, right? It's the fingers. Because I love this idea that we're just the universe experiencing itself. Because it's a really good way of sort of, and there's so many different levels you can take this on, right? You're just like, well, nothing matters. We're all just the universe experiencing itself. And the first time I think I heard people talk about that, I was really like, so that means like nothing matters? Or that means like my life is just basically a entertaining game for a being I could never possibly imagine. But I was thinking of the universe as too much like a person. I think like a deity. If you think about the universe as everything, and then we are just gradations of that everything, and therefore our conscious experience is just that everything repeating itself in this sort of infinite recursion. Well, then actually you can get some kind of interesting mystical and cosmological contemplations. And I like it when in spirituality they sort of move past this sort of like the shallow appropriativeness, which it does happen, but there's also parts of it which are deep and mystical and can like actually make you think about like what is the universe. So that's why I like the universe experiencing itself with the finger meme. I also think it's just like a really good sort of visual representation of a cosmological principle, which is rare on the internet.
Agreed. So the next question is about AI. I noticed that one of the spiritual influencers seemed to have AI generated images on her website. Have
Oh,
there
they all
been
do.
any comments about AI generated content from the spiritual community, negative, positive, or neutral?
I mean I hate AI, so I feel like I haven't done a lot of research into this, but from the research I've done over the past couple of years, I would say in general they love it. Like I was talking to someone who called himself a shaman, and he was like, I don't use the mainstream media. I get all my downloads myself. And then I go here, and then he opened up his iPad and he pointed to Chat GPT, and I was like, oh. And he like literally like writes prompts into Chat GPT and then thinks it's like an oracle from the universe. Because if the universe is everything, then why wouldn't it also be AI? So just like you can read messages in Lost and other TV shows, absolutely you could get messages from the universe in AI. And AI really lends itself to that interpretation because it does answer your prompts in this sort of obsequious way, where it's just trying to like repeat back what you've put in there in a way that makes you feel good about it. Sorry, I really hate AI. So yeah, they love it. They think it's great. I don't see many critical voices thus far. It may change. And the AI generated images, yeah, they all do that. It's so and like especially with like that sort of like weird, slightly surreal quality that AI images have lends itself really well to pictures of aliens. So, because it already is kind of surreal. So yeah, it's really common. It's everywhere.
Yeah. And just to support exactly what you said, I'm teaching a graduate seminar on spirituality right now. We had a conversation about this yesterday. There are several students who observed the same thing you're seeing, which is a real embrace of AI in a practical but also cosmological way.
Oh yeah, it is the universe speaking to you, which is it can be kind of dangerous, I think, because it can really reinforce people's assumptions, I think, in quite a negative way sometimes, maybe.
So we have two questions about Peter Durston. So
Okay.
maybe I'll just ask them both at the same time here.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued about the first man you mentioned that didn't jump off the rock. What's he up to now? Did he have a following, or was this an isolated incident of him believing we were in this specific simulation? And the second question, what do you think about Peter and him finding lost as a symbol, the sign 316 in particular? It could be seen as John 316 for a Christian person who would value that sign, guiding them to what they believe to be true. Do you think it's true that people take signs to whatever they want to be true rather than one thing being true?
Okay. So Peter is now 81, 82 years old. No, he's older than that now. It's like 84. He still lives in Sedona. He lives in a different apartment. I would say the last time I saw him was 2022. Um, so my information might be outdated. So he still lives in Sedona. He's retired. He was a lawyer in his career. He's quite a successful lawyer. He's from New York City. Um, so he retired to Arizona to follow his spiritual path. He worked part-time as a public defender until he retired. So he had quite like a normal job and normal life. And then in the process of following his spiritual path, he started this thing called the Top of Bell Rock Club. So you asked, does he have a following? Sort of, yes. And it's called the Top of Bell Rock Club. It might still be on Facebook. He had this Facebook page. I think it had like 4,000 people on it the last time I checked in, which again was several years ago. And so anyone who visited him in Sedona had to, they could stay with him for free, but they had to come up to the top of Bell Rock with him. That was like the exchange. And once you'd come up to the top of Bell Rock with him, you were in the Top of Bell Rock Club. He put you on his Facebook. He would like take pictures of people on the top, and they would like kind of it sort of became this thing, and like people would take guitars up there, people would sing up there. We made a human pyramid up there at one point. So for like the year I was doing fieldwork in Sedona in 2012 and 2013, I and our other friend Rick would help him take these groups of tourist visitors up to the top of Baroque. They would contact him through Couchsurfers, which I don't know if you know that website. Is it still around? I think it got a bit sketchy. But basically you could stay at people's houses for free. Imagine all the ways that could go wrong. Peter was generally fine. Generally. So, but yeah, so people contact him through Couchsurfers. He'd say, you have to come and stay at Top Bar Rock. But he didn't use like free accommodation in Sedona. So a lot of, especially like young people who were traveling, a lot of people came and stayed with him. They joined this club. They were on his Facebook page. Like some of them, it was just they met him while they were there. They had a good time on holiday. They moved on. So following, I mean, but some of them were like really into it. Like he did another solstice thing in 2018. So he said the portal was going to open in 2018. And all these guys that had gone to the top of Bell Rock with him, they came back and they were like there for like 40 hours meditating and they were like filming it and putting it on Facebook. So yeah, some people took it seriously. Some people had like really strong experiences while they were up there. Not always positive. Some of them were negative. A lot of people just had fun. So yeah, so he did sort of have a following, sort of, but he never really wanted a following. Like, our friend Rick, who would sort of help guide people up to the top with us, would always joke about Peter being a cult leader. It was sort of like this joke we had, like, Peter's a cult leader. And certainly people wrote about him on the internet that way. Like the whole like 21st December thing got like kind of famous. Like it was on Fox News. And they were like helicopters there on the 21st December 2012. There was like the police were there, the media were there, they were down in the car park and up in the air. So like a lot of people heard about it. In fact, someone mentioned it to me like a few weeks ago in Glastonbury. Because we were talking about the Mayan Long Camp calendar because he was a guy who was really into it and had written books about it. And he was like, there was that guy in Sedona who jumped off the rock. And I was like, that's my friend Peter. He didn't jump. So it's still remembered now by some spiritual people who were into the Mayan Long Camp calendar thing. Um, so yeah, sort of followers, sort of not. There were definitely a few things that happened during the year I was there where I saw him like push people away who took him, who like tried to follow him too seriously, who tried to kind of set him up as like some sort of religious leader. He didn't really want that, but he didn't mind if people came and climbed this rock with him and then went away, especially if they were young women. Um,
So the second question I think is about the hermeneutics of numerology and
Oh,
just like
okay.
how the practice works. So if it's like picking up this number 316 that coincides with his birthday, that's also an important verse in John for Christians. How do some things get grabbed and not other things? And is there a kind of logic to it? Is there like a more acceptable way to go about it? Like how does I guess like the interpretation maybe of synchronicity operate as a practice?
So I think synchronicity is very subjective. And it really depends on like how much meaning you personally are reading into whatever the symbol is. So like Peter also mentioned John 3:16, by the way, as well as Lost, about why 3:16 was significant. He's like, oh, and it's, that Bible verse people hold up at baseball games. He was Jewish, so he didn't really care about John 3:16, but he knew that people held up at baseball games. But yeah, so he did mention it. So it's and I don't think the symbols people pick are arbitrary. I think they pick symbols that are meaningful to them, but the path by which that symbol becomes meaningful is often quite idiosyncratic, especially in spirituality. So like the angel numbers, I always get asked, why these repeated numbers? And I've managed to trace, again, through other people's work who are historians, like the first sorts of people who started using it. Like there was a channeler in Tulum, Mexico, called Solar Anra, who started talking about 1111 through her channeling. And Doreen Virtue, who's sort of an interesting figure because she had this like whole conversion to like evangelical Christianity and like forswore her previous publications. But she was the one who made all those oracle cards, if you've ever seen them. They have like different decks. There's loads of them now, but I used to have an Ascended Masters deck, which was one of the Doreen Virtue ones. I wish I still had it 'cause apparently they're worth lots of money now. So there's sort of like roots where these symbols become available, right? Someone like Doreen Virtue, like puts a lot out about angel numbers. So then a lot of other people hear it. So even though it's sort of your idiosyncratic path that made it meaningful to you, you still came across it because usually some sort of significant person or organization made that more available. So it's not arbitrary. There is a history, and that history can be traced. And there are often sort of cultural logics as to why some things are more meaningful than others, like I was talking about previously with India, right? Numerology has its own long history. And there's sort of other directions you can go into. Like I didn't really talk about it in this talk, but there's a lot of overlap between spirituality and conspiracy theories like QAnon. And they started doing their own form of gematria at some point, which is like an old Jewish or Hebrew form of mystical numerology. And they really made it up though. So there's sort of these like longer histories which make these things available to you now, but then it's still up to you to find it meaningful. Like I never found 1111 meaningful, but I did start noticing it. But there's like this neurological thing, right? When someone says something to you, then your brain will remember it more. Like if you buy a Toyota, you'll start seeing Toyotas everywhere because now that make of car is meaningful to you because it's your car. So when I go into Sedona and Peter started talking about 1111, I did start noticing 1111 on clocks and on, you know, price registers or whatever, but that's because he had made it meaningful to me. I never felt like I was having a spiritual experience though. So that's where it becomes personal. Like for some people that would be. Like I got told by someone that when you start seeing 1111 everywhere, that's the start of your awakening and it's the start of aliens trying to talk to you through these numbers. So, for some people it's meaningful in that way, but others not.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to skip around just a little bit because I can grab a different type of question. This one is like a scholarly question. You framed your work against that of Andrea Jane, stating that more important questions are how global spirituality spreads and assessing its consequences. For Jane, the consequences of this globality has been the transmission and persistence of neoliberal forms of governance. I'm wondering if you can speak to the consequences that your methodology has revealed.
Well, so I would say that I was saying that those were questions that were more meaningful to me in my work because I'm doing something slightly different. Like I'm not repeating what she's done. So I wouldn't say I was setting myself up in argument or contrast. I actually think if you read Andrea Jane's book and you read my book, we make a lot of similar points about spirituality as a neoliberal form. Like it's sort of the main argument, I would say, the main theoretical argument of my first book is that spirituality is a neoliberal form. And I go through all these sort of characteristics of neoliberalism, like its financialization, its deregulation, and its individualism. And then I talk about how those take form in spirituality. Like, it's a deregulated system, right? It's these influencers who are not part of an organization and they have this sort of precarious form of labor that they have to make it on their own, right? Everything's turned into something that can be sold on the marketplace, right? That's financialization. So I made this very strong argument in my book about spirituality being a neoliberal form, and Andrea Jane did as well. I think she's probably slightly more critical than I am. Um, I would say. And I think that's good. I think her critique is really valuable. And I think especially the position that she has, she makes that critique really clearly, and it's a really relevant argument for the field. So I wouldn't necessarily I would see my work as in conversation with hers, but I also think we need to sort of maybe, now that the whole field of studying spirituality has become obsessed with whether it's neoliberal or not, I think we need to move on from that. So that's why I said the questions we need to now ask, now that we've sort of made this point about how neoliberal it is, because it emerged during this period of neoliberal capitalism and from the late sort of 70s, 80s, 90s going into the 21st century. So now that we've made that argument, now that we've established that, where do we go next? Because I think there is this tendency to be a little bit dismissive. I also think, which one of Andrew Jay's main argument, that spirituality not only sort of perpetuates neoliberalism, but also smuggles in a quite insidious way a quite conservative politics that can kind of turn into this quite right-wing spirituality. Um, that really comes out more in my work when I start talking about conspiracy theories. But today I've been trying to think about, like, what if we thought about global spirituality not just as something that's, capitalism's handmaiden, right? What if it's also meaningful to people? I don't want to be dismissive to things that people have found helpful or kind of enlightening. A lot of people benefit immensely from spiritual practice. For example, people in recovery from various addictions or mental illness, people who have all kinds of chronic illnesses, they often find forms of relief through spiritual practice that are just not available to them in mainstream medicine. And I think that not enough attention has been paid in the field to that part, and also to the part which was my main point in this talk. And I say the consequences of my methodology is really looking at those local particularities, because I'm an anthropologist at the end of the day. And as much as global forms are important, they always take local variations. And that's becoming much more clear to me now that I've been doing fieldwork in Glastonbury. Like, there's some things in Glastonbury which sound just the same as in Sedona, like people talking about like the oneness of the universe and experiencing stuff. Like, I've had that exact same conversation in the market in Glastonbury that I've had like walking at rocks in Sedona. But as I said, like, Glastonbury also has this whole sort of pagan side to it, which is just not there in Sedona at all. It also has a lot more sort of community groups and just a lot more sort of groupishness. Like, Sedona is very individualized, whereas Glastonbury, they like to form little groups. There's like the Druids and then the goddess spirituality, and then they're always talking about each other behind each other's backs. But then also getting along and coordinating, like the whole of Beltane, it's like all these different events, and each event is organized by a different group, and they're not coordinated with each other at all, but they all just sort of happen on the day in this sort of seamless fashion. And I'm really interested by that because, one of the critiques that is made about spirituality and it being neoliberal is that it's so individualistic that it sort of undermines community cooperation. And in Sedona, I would say yes, but in Glastonbury, I would actually say no. That's not what's happening. They have all these food pantries and food banks, for example, that they organize because there's a lot of travelers that come there. Traveller has a very specific association in this part of England, but they just feed them. They're just like, people come, they live in vans, and we feed them. And that I was just like, well, that sort of goes against this whole sort of neoliberal, it's destroying society argument that I, in fact, have been making for years. So I've been starting to rethink my own work lately. And this is just sort of the embryonic form of that.
Yeah, thank you. You answered the question that I was going to ask as a follow-up, which is about how it might work differently in different sites, because this has become also a question that I'm very interested in my own research, the diversity of politics within this larger umbrella. And there are certainly, I'm finding there are examples all over the place in interesting ways. There's some other good questions. One is really specifically about so the channeling of aliens by
Mhm.
spiritual people that you featured. How well developed are the sort of understanding of the alien society beyond them being a federation or council?
I don't know if they have that much of a, I don't know. That's mostly what they do when they channel aliens, is they give messages for people on Earth about what's happening on Earth. It doesn't really describe the contours of these alien societies. There are different races, which there's definitely this sort of hierarchy of alien races as well. And there's definitely a way that you can, or some people use that has some parallels in racism and racial hierarchies, right? So the reptilians are meant to be lizard-like. Sometimes they are described as being dark. Then the higher levels are sometimes called, there's the Zetas, which is like the Greys, which is sort of the common one from pop culture. But then there's like the Nordics, who are like these tall, white-skinned, blue-eyed, blonde-haired aliens that look like elves from Lord of the Rings kind of thing. So there is this sort of delineation of different races of aliens, which can be problematic. Um, Not everyone who channels aliens goes into that, though, I would say. And also, I would say that sort of hierarchy of races of aliens also comes from the Theosophical Society. That's from the work of Helena Blavatsky. So that's quite an old idea. And it definitely sort of has its roots in European race science, I would say. But yeah, they don't really talk about what the aliens are doing back on their planets. The aliens often are described as being in ships around the Earth, in fact, because they're engaged in this battle with each other that the Earth is a sort of a battleground for. And sometimes people will not only channel aliens, but they also say that they bilocate. So they are working both on Earth and up in the ships at the same time. But the focus of the aliens is always on what's going on Earth, at least from what I've heard of it. There may be people out there who do go into more detail that I've just not come across.
Kind of a classic religious studies question here. Has researching global spirituality influenced your personal beliefs?
I overuse the word vibe. Does that count? I like massively overuse the word vibe. But not really. So I'm agnostic, which means you don't really know. It was a bit of a cop out. I was raised in the Church of England. My mum was a vicar, which is our word for priest. But she didn't. We're Church of England is very socially liberal, and we don't make our children join our religion. Which is probably why it's dying out. So she just let me make up my own mind, and I was agnostic from a young age, and I still am. I definitely had some interesting experiences studying global spirituality. That's for sure. Like you do these practices, and some of them will have sort of quite an intense effect on you, especially some of the more physical practices. Like I learned how to do kung fu while I was in Sedona, and some of that was like really intense. And I definitely had some interesting experiences. But I've never been the kind of person who's like turned an interesting experience into a universal law. I'm just like, well, that was an interesting experience, and then I just sort of carry on with my life. I'm not like, this means I must do this from now on. And again, I just think, I don't know. I tend to take religion quite lightly, and I think that's quite a British thing to do. We're very secular.
I wonder if you might reflect on an observation that Omri Elisha made in a great lecture he gave on astrology earlier this month. Someone asked him a really similar question toward the end of the Q&A, and his response was he was kind of like, well, I don't know if believing in astrology is quite the right way to describe your relationship to it. And he was like, if I live my life according to it, it might not matter whether I believe it or not. So it might be more like, am I into astrology is the relevant question. And I'm wondering if you found anything similar in your field research, because astrology is obviously just like a slice of kind of this much broader set of things that you're looking at. So I'm just curious what you might think about that distinction.
I definitely think astrology is something people do rather than something believe in. It's sort of one of those classic tests for like people who say they're not religious, and you're like, well, how many of you know your sun sign? How many of you know your horoscope? And a lot more will be into astrology than will call themselves religious. Yeah, astrology is a practice, and a lot of the things in spirituality are practices. They're things you do rather than things you believe in, right? And this whole emphasis on believing is very Protestant, right? But also I was raised, in Anglicanism, which is a Protestant church, so maybe I should believe in things. Um, what was the question again?
Oh, just like, is that distinction relevant for other aspects that you've observed in your
Yeah, I
work
mean, I
in
think
spirituality?
definitely. I think I really try and talk about spiritual practice because it's definitely something people do rather than a set of beliefs that they hold. In fact, a lot of the people I've spoken to in the study of spirituality sort of reject this notion of believing something that like that's too restrictive. And often they will sort of change between the practices they do. And they don't see any sort of contradiction or inconsistency or problem with this. Like I was called to do astrology, and then I felt called to do, I don't know, craniosacral, and then I got called to do this. And then they just kind of go between those different practices, all while seeing them all as in, contributing to their spiritual path and their spiritual ascension. Um, so I think I really think that believing is something that if you're studying Protestantism is very relevant. But I think when you're talking about spirituality, I prefer to talk about practice. I talk about symbols, aesthetics, rituals a bit. Yeah, they do like rituals. But not really so much believing because there really isn't a codified set of beliefs like a creed in spirituality, and it is very much based on the rejection of creeds, um, to use the Christian term, because that's sort of too limiting, and that's what they were trying to get away from with organized religion. I will say, so actually, just kind of go back, has the study of spirituality changed me? I do. I did start doing yoga when I very first started my PhD because I thought this will help me meet spiritual people. And it did. But I still do yoga now and I do it every day. And actually, I really like it. It's really good for my joints. So, so yeah, there we go. I did develop my own spiritual practice, but I'm not sure how spiritual. I feel like I'm one of those people that like Andrea Jane or someone like Liz Bucar would like criticize because I just do yoga because I like it. And I don't see it as a religious thing. But it's nice. I like it. But I do it every day and it's an important part of my day. So maybe that is a spiritual practice.
So there are a couple more questions in the chat, but we only have about 30 seconds left. So I think we'll wind down here. And thank you so much for making time for us despite a time difference. And thanks for giving us this really valuable overview. This field is, there's been so much written for decades, but I think we're struggling to do this thing that we came to at the end, which is like, how do we find coherence and how do we find an objective study? And how do we hang on to it as opposed to refracturing it and then kind of moving it into all these different fields and looking at all these different ways. So this has been really, really helpful. I'm glad that a bunch of my students were able to attend, and I'm glad that we were able to record it. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.